Okay, so we the first part of class we've been talking about web applications and Project 4, and so you saw what it can do. You saw that we're running a web server over here in one process, and that we can do things with that web server either in the browser or just by hitting the URL using curl or something, or we also have a Java application that interacts with that web server. Same web server, different clients. Let's talk about the implementation and all of the pieces, parts that go into making all of this. So, the first thing that I want to talk about is the, oh, interesting. How come that's, oh, sorry. Synchronize this. I just think that's a module. Can't reload the project? How do I do that? Invalidate caches restart. Let's just restart. Sorry, that wasn't treating that project as a module, and so I'm worried then that things like running tests aren't going to work inside IntelliJ. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I'll support your plugin. Oh, it still didn't add it. Isn't that weird? How do I add that as a module? I wonder where I just recognize that. Okay, I'm going to do something else. I'm just going to open up that one project instead of the whole caboodle. Open. Git. Nope. PSU. Git. Somewhere in 2016. Appointment book. We'll do that. Add the root. Okay, cool. Now it knows that it's a project. Yes, okay, good deal. So there are more source files in here, as you can imagine. I mean, there's more to this application. It takes more source code to find all this stuff. Maven has just the same way. It has a standard layout for the location of your source files, for your test files. For web applications, it has source main web app. There was an index.html that we saw, and this is HTML content that's served up by the web app. There's something called the web.xml. And so the web.xml is a configuration file for that web application. It basically, it does a number of things. What this one is doing is mapping the /appointments URL to the appointment book servlet. So if we go back to where we hit this, so this URL, there is the host and port that the web server is running on. Appointment book is the web application that's running within that web container. And then within that web application, so basically the web application is described by this Maven project. This Maven project builds that web application, the appointment book web application. And then appointments is a servlet within that web application. You can have multiple servlets. And so this web application only has one. Yours will only have one. And it is served up on this /appointments URL suffix right here. And it's saying, okay, map this URL pattern to the appointment book servlet, which is configured right up here, which basically says the servlet named appointment book servlet is in the class edu pdx for 10j whitlock appointment book servlet. That's what it's saying. You won't need to change this, but it's part of understanding what the web application is all about. Yes?
Who parses this XML file?
Excellent question. So the question was, who parses this XML? Where is all this happening? This is all the responsibility of the web container. So there is there are standards around what makes a Java application. Everything from the location of thing. There's something called a WAR file, which is like a jar file. It's an archive of multiple files, all archived up together, and it has certain there's certain specifications about like where things need to be, the format of this XML file. So there's all the standards in here. And so what a web container like Jetty does is it implements those standards. So when you deploy, you start up the web container and you deploy your application into it, Jetty says, okay, great, I know about the standard, I will take this web application, I will pick it apart according to the standard, and I will look at this configuration file, I'll parse this configuration file, I'll set up all my internal routing and everything like that, so that when it receives a request for this URL, it will route it to your appointment book servlet.
When you say the container, you mean visually in our project structure over there? I mean, is it something that we can see in our Maven project?
The container?
Or is it or is it some archived file somewhere? I mean, is it some?
The container. So let's see here. I think of the container as the process right here is Jetty running right here. Jetty is, so when you say Maven Jetty run, there is a Maven plugin that will go and download the web container, all the code that it needs. Jetty is written in Java, so it downloads a bunch of jar files from every place. Actually, the first time you run it, you'll see that all these URLs are flying by.
XML file, based on that's what's going to parse.
Yes, so it downloads this web container for you, starts up the web container, and I have the Maven project configured to, the Maven project will then deploy the web application into that Jetty, and it's running. So when I say the container, it's sort of this ephemeral thing that runs and serves up your web application.
But yeah, it's a piece of executable
yes.
code. It's an executable.
Right. And
it's like the JVM.
It's running in a JVM.
It is. It's running. Yeah.
So when you say Maven Jetty run, it probably Maven Java application starts up starts up a JVM, runs Maven. Maven's sitting there running. You tell Maven to run Jetty. It goes and downloads all the stuff and then starts up Jetty inside that same JVM. It's running Jetty. Jetty, which is running inside Maven, which is running inside the JVM. We're we're into Inception territory here, right? Okay, and you have that, and then it's running your web application inside that. Inside your web application is your servlet. That's the one piece of code that you write. All this other stuff, someone else has written. That's sort of the beauty of all of this, right? You can just focus on what your application needs to do, not all of this plumbing. You need to understand enough about the plumbing to know how to play in with it. You need to understand the APIs, and we'll see some of the APIs that you need to conform to and that you will use. But all the plumbing, you just have to believe that it works. And then you just have to know, the contract that you need to be aware of is that there are certain methods that you need to provide, which basically say, well, here's a request, you do something with it. So I'm the web container, I'm Jetty, I know how to take HTTP request, so a standard HTTP request comes in on my port, on my 8080 port, and I take it apart and I route all over the place. I finally get down to your code. It's like, okay, you figure it out, and then you do what you need to do with it, and then you say, okay, well here's the response, and then Jetty takes your response and puts it all back through the plumbing and sends it back to the user. Lots of hand waving ensues. Okay. Okay, so now let's look at the code, some of the code that you need to write on the server side. I'm going to try that presentation mode, see if that helps. Yeah, it's okay. Okay, so here I have a servlet class. Servlet extends something called HTTP Servlet. HTTP Servlet is this Java X Servlet artifact. So this is the standard. This is the API that is supported by the web container. So this is the contract that you use to interface with the web container. HTTP Servlet has a method called doGet. doGet is invoked by the web container when a GET request comes in for a URL. This is how it expresses the various verbs. Okay, so again, all the request comes in, goes through all the plumbing. It's finally delivered to your code. The way your code then is this servlet object that implements the doGet method. doGet has two parameters: HTTP Servlet request. So this is one of those servlet APIs. This is the standard API. Something that represents a request and another object that represents a response. And so basically what your code does is it says, okay, I will get some information from the request, I will do something with that information, and I will send it back in the response. Okay? So, a couple things you need to do. So first off, this just deals with text. And so there's like the MIME type, there's the content type for content on the web, which basically says, here's what I'm giving you. And so this is just plain text. But if you're serving up images or whatever, you say, okay, well, image JPEG or whatever. That's your content type. So you got to do that first, and that way the client will know sort of what it's getting. And then the logic of this servlet is purposely very simple. It basically says, okay, there is a parameter called key, and I'm going to get the value of that parameter. And get parameter, well, we'll take a look at that method in a second. So get that parameter key from the request, store it in a string. If the key doesn't equal null, then write out the value for that key. Otherwise, write all of the mappings. And so then let's just see it in action one more time. So let's just say key equals A. When I hit key equals A, as a matter of fact, let's watch this. Oops, let's get out of this. I'm going to do something even. Oh wait, can I do that? I might need to start over again. I was going to run it under the debugger, which let's give that a try because I think that might be enlightening and also show you how to use the debugger. So I'm going to stop I just Control-C my server. I'm going to run. I'm going to run that. Let's see here. Right, remote. So I want this command line. Is that copied to the clipboard? It wants me to attach on port. So this is debug Jetty web container. I think I can attach now. Yep, it says it's attached. I'm going to set a breakpoint here. So before I do that, I want to show you guys something. Okay. Well, I restarted my web container, and I was only storing information in memory, so all my data is gone. Okay. So this is why Satan invented databases. So anyway, so now I don't have any more data anymore because I was storing everything in memory, and I restarted my process. So then let's add a couple of appointments, and the easiest way to do that is to go back to my HTML form, and I'll just add back my data before, which was A and 1, and then I'll add B and 2. Nice, and now when I load all of them, okay, I've got my stuff. Okay, so I'm back to the state that I was before. I am going to set a breakpoint in my debugger, and I am going to reload this URL. When I load this URL, this is going to, I'm going to do a get. Sorry, I should probably do it over here. List all key value pairs. So when I click the submit button, what this will do is this will post to it'll get the appointments URL. So I click submit, and IntelliJ came to the front because it stopped in the debugger. Okay, so debugging, have you guys used the debugger that much? Some people yes, some people no. Remember what I said, like the very first thing, this is an order of magnitude more complex than the stuff that you did in the first 3 projects. I've found that it's when you're dealing with multiple processes, having the debugger, using a debugger to sort of figure out what's going on and where things are is very helpful. But there's lots more things to keep in your head. So what's going on here? I've got Jetty running here in this JVM, and when I started that JVM, I said that was Maven Ops. Go back and watch on the video. Maven Ops to say, hey, when you run Maven, run with the debugger enabled so I can attach to the debugger. In IntelliJ, I attach to the debugger and I set one of these breakpoints to say, hey, when this line of code gets executed, stop there, and so I can debug through it. Then I hit my URL. I hit that URL, which went to my web container, and it hit the breakpoint in my servlet. Lots of pieces, parts moving, but nice to understand where we're at. Okay, great. Okay, so now I got one of these, my doGet method got invoked because I made a GET request of my URL. And I set the content type, and now I'm going to get the parameter. And let's see here, the parameter, well, and let's see what its value is. Oh, and then I'm sorry, I'm going to go, I'm going to step, which is F8. I'm going to the next one. And the key is null. Well, that's true because I did not have a parameter on my URL called key. And so what do I do? I'm going to write my values out. Sorry, it is null, so I'm going to write all my mappings out. And now I'm done with that method. If I go back to my, oops, sorry, I'm going to continue running. And poof, there it is. Okay, so you see everything that's going on here, right? So it's like we've got this Java process. We're just sitting there, just waiting for stuff to happen to it, waiting to be told what to do. I can attach to the debugger there, and I can say, hey, set a breakpoint so that when you get to this line of code, tell me and stop executing so I can step through it. Then I hit it with the URL. All the stuff gets triggered, and now I debug that. So we'll just keep that up and running because we might come back here again. Okay, so that's my doGet method. That's what it does. Let's take a look at some of this other stuff. GetParameter is another method on my servlet, which is a little convenience method that basically says, hey, it's the name of a parameter and take that request. It is basically a nice wrapper around the GetParameter method of the request itself. It handles null or empty string, and so then if the GetParameter returns either null or empty string, then it returns null. Otherwise, it will return the value that was returned by the parameter. So now when I hit this same URL with my key equals, key equals A, stop back in the debugger because it hit the doGet again. I'll step over, maybe I'll step into this one. So I'll step into by using this thing, which is F9, I think. No, F7. Okay, so here I am in this method. I want to call the GetParameter method on the request. Now the value here is A. It tells me this nicely. It is not null, and so then I'll return that. A is not null, then I will write the value out. Let's see what it means to write the value. Actually, no, we'll do that one more time. So then I'll continue on, which I think is F9. Yes, F9. Go back to my browser. Okay, there is just the value for 1. I won't step through the code. I will just walk through the code instead. Same thing. Okay, so write value. Now, I use a very complex data structure called a map to store all of my key value pairs. Right. So all I'm doing here is just I've got a map in memory. But here's the interesting thing about this map. Right. This is the servlet is a long-lived object. So the object is created when the web application is deployed. Like when Jetty starts up and the application is deployed, it creates the servlet. And so like when the servlet is created, it initializes its fields, right? And so now it creates this hash map. So I've got this global variable almost, right? That is persistent across web requests. So all these requests come and go. And I can use like my command line tool, multiple times. It's going to stop here again. I'm going to take that breakpoint off for a second so that we can see. I can have multiple requests here. I can pay C in 3. I can do D in 4. I can make multiple requests. And it's all that same map. It just keeps getting populated, right? So that thing lives as long as the servlet lives, which is as long as the web application lives. So here again, it's like other programs are coming and going. They're doing their thing, but you've got this long-lived servlet. You've got this long-lived web application that whose life is longer than all of the client calls. Okay, so we're looking at write value. Well, what does write value do? Well, it's given a key. It looks at that key in the map to get the value, and then okay, you want to write some stuff back to the web request. Well, this is Java, and Java likes to reuse code. So it's like, well, you want to write some text back to an HTTP servlet response. Okay, I'm going to give you a print writer. You guys remember print writer, right? It's Java I/O. Everybody knows print writer. It's great. And so then it gives you a familiar API, as opposed to like some special writer that you can only write to HTTP servlets or HTTP servlet responses. That would be bad. So they just give you a print writer, and so you can call your methods like print line that you're familiar with the mapping count. And I do this cute little messages thing that you can look into on your own time if you really want to format the messages. I call the flush method, which is like, hey, write everything out. And then finally, I set the status on the response. So as we were talking about earlier, part of the HTTP protocol is has a response, sort of a status code of like, okay, you asked for this thing and it was okay, so I'll return a 200, right? And you've all seen 404, right? Well, what 404 is the standard HTTP standard response code, status code for resource not found. No magic there, and it's not like someone thought it was being cute. It was 404. Actually, it's really quite pedestrian. Like, oh, I couldn't find it. But anyway, and so then you set the status, and status takes an int, but there are all sorts of constants on HTTP servlet response that you say, okay, SC okay, so servlet or status code okay, that's 200, and that's what you do. So anyway, so that's writing value, and then
and those are all. Those are the standard. Those are kind of part of. Those are standard errors from the protocol.
Yes.
And what object gives us that static final? Or so what class provides that static final?
HTTP servlet response, which is
yeah,
one of
right,
the which is one of the standard APIs, right? Okay, so here again, there are all sorts of standards here, right? There is the HTTP standard, which is like a bunch of dudes in Switzerland or something coming up with that thing, right? And then there's like the Java, there's the Java Servlet API, which is a bunch of dudes like in Silicon Valley coming up with that. But it's all interoperable, and because they're standards, right? And they conform to each other. So, and it's also like different levels of abstraction. As a matter of fact, if you let's see here, do I talk about it? I think I talk about it in the lecture. We even do some things like looking at what's written to the socket. As a matter of fact, no, we'll see that here in a little bit. Because like below HTTP, there's like the socket protocol and other stuff like that. Yeah, anyway, we'll get to that. Let's see here. Now, that's sort of the happy path. Let's see if we can get some not so happy path. Get parameter. Okay, so that's the do get. So I can hit that in a browser. Do post. So get is all about reading, right? Oh, look, I read. Here's all the mappings. Here's the value for this given key. Post is the thing that ultimately writes into that puts into that map. So it's the thing it calls put. So what does it need in order to put in the map? It needs a key and a value, and it gets the key and the value from the servlet parameter, from the HTTP request servlet. So the post is done in one of these HTML forms. Got to sneeze. Excuse me. It's done with this one right here. They create a new pair, and so if I say F and I don't put anything in there, the following happens. It says HTTP error 412 problem accessing requirement. The required parameter value is missing. Let's go back to the debugger and see how that's implemented. So here's undo post. So I'm going to submit my form. I'm not going to put a value here. I'm just going to put the key. Oh, look at that, tooltips. Wow, fancy. Must be HTML 4.0. Okay. So here we are in do post. And again, we're sort of saying, hey, what I'm going to send back to you is text. So it's going to ask for the key parameter. And then, okay, key has the value F, right? That's what I passed in right here in this form. It's going to ask for the parameter value. The value of the value parameter is null, right? So I didn't put anything there, and it comes through as null. And now I'm going to say, okay, missing. It's going to call this missing required parameter method. I'm going to step into that, and it then gets this message, which is the required, the required parameter value is missing, and then it calls the send error method on the HTTP servlet response, saying, hey, send the error with this SC, so the status code precondition failed, it's error 412, with that message. Sends that back, and let's see here, and then I'll simply return from my do post method. And so then the HTTP response, it has an error code, status code of 412, and it has that message. And the way the web browser, actually the way Jetty, I guess, sends that back is this HTML. Right? So if we view the source, oh, yeah. I didn't like that because it was a post. Okay. Really? Chrome. Okay. Anyway, and so Jetty then, when it sees this, like, oh look, the servlet returned to 412. Well, I'll pretty up that page a little bit and then send that back to the client so that it can be displayed. But anyway, that's returning. That's how you return error codes. So, like for instance, if when your parameters are valid. So that's what happens on the server side. So I start you out with a very, very simple application. And so what you need to do then is re-implement this servlet to work with your appointment book and your appointments and your pretty printer and other stuff like that. That's sort of the real guts of the stuff that happens on the server. Okay, and then and so then and so that once you do that though, you'll have an implementation of these URLs. Of these URLs that do stuff with your appointments. Okay, now let's take a look at this command line program. So I've got a Java program that has a very simple command line and calls those same URLs. So we've seen a browser calling those URLs. Now we're going to see a Java program calling those same URLs. So now, let's get that out of here. Now I'm going to go back to my source code. And by the way, the servlet was in my. There you go. The servlet is my package. I don't do anything totally special there. And the main method is here. Actually, project 4. So, project 4, parsing the command line. You know how to do that. Validating stuff in the command line, like I'm missing args. Awesome. Parsing the port. Here's the real interesting stuff. So, I already know and so now I have parsed the command line. I'm going to create something called an appointment book REST client. So this is an object that comes with an archetype that knows how to make URL calls. And it has methods that abstract out the web requests, the URL requests. So basically, if the key that came on the command line was null, then print them all out. And the way you do that is call this method, whose implementation we'll look at in a little bit. Similarly, it's got to get values if you have a key but no value. Otherwise, it calls add key value pair. So what the appointment book REST client does is abstracts out all of the interaction with the server all in one class. So your main doesn't need to worry about putting together URLs or anything like that. It can just call the methods on this appointment book REST client object. And each one of these returns something called a response, this is a class that I wrote to make it easier to interact with HTTP URLs. And so then the response code, I guess the last thing it does is it says, hey, if the response code isn't what you expect, in this case it's HTTP OK, unless if it's not 200, then issue an error from the command line. So this is all the command line parsing and stuff like that in here. And this is stuff you should all be familiar with. I'm not going to go into too much detail because the interesting stuff is in this appointment book REST client. So this is here again. This is part of the archetype. This is for you to use and evolve to implement your project. So it knows about stuff like well, a URL that you call. Oh, and as a matter of fact, this thing extends HTTP request helper, which is a class that I wrote for you guys that will do a lot of the guts of making the HTTP request, right? Because I mean, what you need to do is you need to, at the lowest level, like you've got your program here, it wants to talk to the server. You've got to open up a socket, make a connection over the port. You need to talk HTTP to it, set all the right headers, and have everything in the right format. While it's all very interesting, and you can learn more about it in the lecture, that's not what I want you to be focusing on in this project. I want to abstract some of it for you, and that's what this HTTP request helper tries to do. I've gotten feedback in the past that it's not as easy to work with as people as I'd like it to be, or I think it is. So let me know what you think about it. Anyway, you create one of these appointment book REST clients, you give it a host name and a port, and it figures out what URL it talks to. And then, like the get all keys and values method basically says, hey, get from my URL. And get is a method that is inherited from the superclass. And get, you can give it a URL string, and then you can give it optional parameters in the key value pair, so you pass in. So for instance here, when we get the values for a given key, we say, hey, do an HTTP get on this URL, and then pass in like key equals this key variable. Or for posting, so when you want to add a key value pair, you post to the URL with, post to my URL is a little convenience method that will give it, that will post to the URL with all the keys and values that you pass in. And then finally, I think I need this for testing. I have a remove all mappings. This isn't strictly necessary for your assignment, but it was helpful in testing. And I guess we'll see that in a little bit. Okay, so this inherited code from HTTP request helper takes care of actually doing the get and doing the post of the URL, and what's returned by that is a response object. And response is something that takes the content back that's returned from the web server, and gives you access to things like the return code and the content as a big long string, and the number of lines in the client's response. So that's what you've got there. Okay. So this is neat. This is used to implement your command line utility. So this is all the code, but wait, we're doing test-driven development in here, right? So we want to write some tests to this. So I've got some sample tests. I have a unit test for the servlet. So, you know what? I'm going to come back to this because there's some complexity there, and I want to start with the integration tests. So when I've talked about integration tests in the past, I've talked about that they're end-to-end tests, or they're... Sorry, do you have a question?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, yeah.
Are we just dealing with text at this point, or does it get somehow formatted into an actual HTML document that gets served back that we're not seeing, or?
Nope. You're just dealing with text. Actually, you're dealing with whatever you want to send over. HTTP deals in text, and so like what we send back and forth is text. Actually, that's why like in our servlet, our content type is plain text. It's not HTML. As a matter of fact, in this project and in most REST APIs, it's not HTML because I mean HTML is something that has been rendered and then made pretty to a human. We're not talking web server to human. We're talking web server to Java command line program. And what they talk is something that they can parse, like your text file format. You're not writing to a file, you're writing to the socket, right? So they can talk back and forth that way, or your pretty critter or whatever. So, yeah, good question. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Oh yes, tests. Actually, any other questions before we start looking at tests? There's a lot here, and so then if it's like, this is crazy, it's like, you're right, it is crazy. But it's advanced Java, come on! It's fun, it's different. It's the web. Okay. Projects. Okay, sorry, tests. So when I talked about, So when I talked about integration tests, I said that integration tests are different from unit tests in a couple of ways. First of all, they tend to be end-to-end tests, meaning that where a unit test is just like testing a given class, integration tests test the interaction between multiple classes, or the interaction between the user or something that approximate your user and the entire program. Well, for this and then your integration tests that we've seen to date have been integration tests for your command line utility, right? I think some of you have taken advantage of that main method runner, whatever I call it, thing, where you can write JUnit tests that actually will invoke your main method and will let you interact, let you validate the right thing was written to standard error, or the right exit code was called by some .exit, right? And that was a different kind of test than you're testing each method of your class. Here we take it a step further, and we have integration tests that test your web application. So what this thing does is this is the appointment book REST client IT integration test. So this is a JUnit test that uses the appointment book REST client to make request URLs of your web application. Okay, so we've got our Jetty running over here on port 8080, and so here we have a test that runs by default on a host name and a port. So by default, it's going to run against localhost 8080. And let's see here. And so then what this thing, like this test right here, if I run it, what it'll do is it'll create a new appointment book REST client on this host and this port. It'll call remove all mappings. And then when you, let's see here, it says assert that the code returned by that response is 200, meaning I can call delete, it'll call remove all mappings, which will then call the delete of the URL and remove all the mappings. So now if I go in and run this, oh yes, I guess I'm still running the debugger someplace. It ran that one test, it passed, so that the response code was 200, and now if I go back to my appointments here and I hit my web application, all my key value pairs are gone. Okay. When I run through IntelliJ like this, yes. So now but here I've got another one that will it'll create a new REST client, and it says, hey, give me all the keys and values, and make sure that the content that was returned in that response like get content, first of all has HTTP status code of 200, so everything was happy, and that the content, the content contains a string that you get when you say there are zero mappings.
Because we created an empty, or that's because we don't have any mappings
in the server that's running right here, yeah. But let's just go and create one. Now if I run that test again, it failed because it expected a string containing 0 key value pairs and got 1. So now I need to run this test again to clear it out. We run this guy. Everybody's happy. Okay, similarly, I've got tests to add a key value pair, so call my client from this. And then, here's one where I can test that if I'm missing a parameter, so if I post to my URL and I don't give it any parameters, then I get an error message, and that I also get a 412 error. Okay, so this is all running it against a running server, so I can do this. It passes. Actually, I'm going to stop my web server right here. I'm going to run it again. What do you think is going to happen? It blows up, saying that the connection was refused when I went to connect to it. Good, that's what I'd expect. So you may ask yourself, it's like, oh, well, you got to have your web server running in order to run these tests. Well, boo hiss! I want to be able to, that means I got to like have all this environment and stuff. Well, Maven can help out with that. So the way I have the Maven project configured is that if you run the integration test phase of the Maven project, it will start up Jetty on a different port. So actually, let me. I'm going to start up Jetty here on port 8080. I'm going to let's see here. I'm going to add some key value pairs. I'm going to just add a couple of them, and I'm going to demonstrate that on port 8080 I've got that. Over here, when I run Maven integration tests, and then run verify after that. Oops, integration test. Maven goes through, runs the unit tests, and then when it builds the web application, and then, oh, I thought I fixed this. Okay, well, so I can't run it on the same port. Okay, fine. So it uses port 8080. I thought it used a different port by default, but I guess not. I'll run it by itself. So when I run the integration test, I've got Maven configured to first start up a Jetty, deploy the web application into it, run the integration tests, all against this Jetty. When the integration tests are done, it will it will fail. Didn't it like tons of warnings? Really? Failed to execute goal. Container already started. Really? Is it running someplace? No. Should run the tests, so it hasn't gotten that far yet. So they're starting it up. Okay. There was something screwy there. It ran it, and then it should shut it down. Oh, interesting. Okay. Damn, I thought I just ran this a couple minutes ago and it worked fine. Well, what should happen, and it looks like it did happen up here. So here's where it ran the, here's where it ran the tests. I wonder if it's because I have both integration test and verify. Let's just try it with verify. But anyway, the nice thing about this is that it takes care of all of this stuff for you. And so then when it works, there you go, now it's successful. Okay, so something about running both integration test and verify breaks it. So don't do that. I can't tell you why. So basically, but what it did is it started up a Jetty. It ran all of the those integration tests, stopped the Jetty, made sure everything passed, and was successful. And so, I mean, I guess the point here is that you can do test-driven development for this project. Just because it's got all these extra pieces and parts and everything like that, I've developed some code and some examples that you can then evolve to do test-driven development on this project, because I think it'll help. So anyway, here's how to test your appointment book client, and then I also have an invoke main test case for invoking your main method also. And so then, again, it's got the ability to like sort of clear everything out, start over again, and then just test like the kind that we've seen before, where you invoke the main method and you can call get exit code, and you can look at standard output and all sorts of good stuff like that. And it's all there in Maven, so you can test it that way. So any questions? There's one other topic on this that I wanted to cover. Oh, okay. So those are integration tests. But as you can see, the integration test took a little while for it to run. Comparatively speaking, 17 seconds elapsed time was, it was more like 30 or 40. And as you add more stuff and as you add more test cases, it's going to get longer and longer. And that's appropriate for integration tests. Integration tests are sort of like the sanity check that you do before you deploy your code or you check other stuff. But you also want to have some unit tests. But look at what the code that you have to deal with. It's like this servlet, and it's like, how do I test this servlet? How do I, because this is meant to be run inside a web container. How do I test that? Well, there's two approaches I recommend that you take. First of all, put as little code in your servlet as possible. Right? Refactor things out into other classes that can be tested, that don't require objects like HTTP servlet request and HTTP servlet response. That's the easiest thing to do. And luckily, you've already got that, right? You've got things like your pretty printer, you've got things like your appointment and your appointment book. And so those things, those classes can be unit tested just like they could in projects 1, 2, and 3. But, I mean, like it or not, there is logic in here. So, for the adventurous student, I offer you this unit test. So there is a, and I talk about Mockito in the dependency injection, I think, lecture, which is sort of like in week 6 or something like that. And what Mockito does is allows you to create mock objects. These are objects that implement a certain interface, but they are not like the normal implementation of that. Meaning the following. So this is a unit test that exercises the servlet outside of the web container. And the way it does it is it creates a servlet object, instantiates a servlet object. After all, it's just a Java object. And then instead of, since it runs outside the web container, it doesn't have like real HTTP requests and HTTP responses. Instead, it uses these mock HTTP servlet requests and mock HTTP servlet responses. And so what you can do, I'm not going to go into super amount of detail here because it's kind of advanced and there'll be lots of questions, is that you can use these Mockito APIs to do things like the following. Say, okay, I'm going to set up my test. Remember the whole given, when, then? So the given part of the test is about saying, okay, here are all the objects that I want to test. So first of all, I'll create my appointment book servlet. I've got my servlet. I'll create one of these mock requests and mock response by saying, give me a mock this class and a mock that class. I also want a mock print writer. And I can say magic things like, I'll use this magic when method to say, hey, when the get writer method is called on my response, which is a mock response, then return this mock print writer that I just did. And then I'll take my mock objects and just send them to my servlet. Now the servlet doesn't know, right? The servlet, your implementation is just like, oh yeah, hey, do get, somebody gave me an HTTP servlet request, great, I'll interact with that. Someone gave me an HTTP servlet response, I'll interact with that. Now normally it's running inside the web container and you're getting the web container's implementation of this. In this unit test, you're getting these mock objects, but your servlet doesn't care. And so then what you can do is you can say, okay, I'm just going to call the code under test, and then I can use this verify piece of magic from Mockito to say, hey, when you interacted with these mock objects, verify that the print line method of my print writer was invoked with this string. Which is exactly, if you go and look at the implementation, exactly what happens. And similarly, verify that set status was called on my mock response with the value SCOK. What this allows you to do is to unit test your servlet completely outside of the web container. But mainly, I guess, if you take one thing away from this, what you take away is that it is possible to unit test the servlets. It is possible to unit test these things that would normally reside in and depend on a Java web application. So this is another option for if you're doing test-driven development of your servlet, you could do it this way. Please go read about the Mockito API. Pretty advanced stuff, and so like after staring for an hour, you're just like feeling confused. Don't worry about it. It's not like required to do this, but if it's something that makes sense to you or something that you really want to dig into it, I recommend that. And then this is run just like any other unit tests. And note that there's no. Let's see here. I don't have a web container running there in the background. This is all just regular old JVM JUnit code. So, and I think that's it. So, this is project 4, and as you can see, again, it's an order of magnitude more complex. There are lots more moving parts. There's lots of more stuff to do. But I'm hoping that you can rely on the skills that you've developed to date in this class to implement this. It's Java, all over the place. We don't need to learn a new programming language. There's APIs that you've seen like print writer that should be familiar to you. And then you can use techniques like test-driven development. You can write unit tests. You can write integration tests for all your code. And so in some respects, it's just another Java programming assignment. It's just a bit more complex than the first 3. Any questions before another break?
So we just copy all the previous classes over to this file?
So yes, so the classes that you reuse from previous projects, like your like your appointment book, probably Googly Mind, your command line parsing code, right? We'll all go over there, and so yeah, just copy those source files in. I guess a couple more things on the assignment. You can go look in my source code for something called a family tree servlet. That will maybe give you some ideas of how you could implement the REST functionality beyond what's already there in the archetype. If you want to learn more about HTTP request helper, you can go check out the class. If you want to use a port other than 8080, let's say someone else is using that port already, you can just run it with the -D HTTP port 8888 or whatever your value is here, I think. And as usual, please only submit. You can only submit Java files. That's all I need. I will create a new Maven project from the archetype, adjust the appropriate things like for your student ID and stuff like that, and start from there. I guess that also means that you can't if you make changes to your web.xml or pom.xml, you can't you really can't communicate those to me. But you shouldn't need to. Everything you should be able to build your application using the pom.xml and the web.xml that come with archetype and not have to change them. If you think you do need to change them, let me know, because either I got something wrong or maybe you got something wrong. Okay, let's take 10 minutes and come back and do a little bit of pair programming and bot programming. There, caught it.